All right, so we are looking at chapter 13, which we traditionally do before the first test. And as you're going to see here in the PowerPoint, some of the objectives are just very nuts and bolts about doing test taking. Again, becoming familiar with different types of tests and test formats, implementing specific test strategies for before, during, and after a test, identifying strategies for answering typical kinds of test questions, multiple choice, true and false, matching, short answer essay. These are things that you'll all encounter in the tests in my course here. But also understanding the role of tests in the learning cycle, defining test anxiety, and then techniques for preventing and controlling it, and then thinking about using test results as a study guide, right? So there's some pragmatic things in terms of taking tests in the moment, but also how they fit into kind of the overall scope of things. All right, so some good points here in terms of thinking about testing as part of the learning cycle, right? So a lot of our daily activities are measurements of progress. So there are, in other words, kind of real life tests that we encounter, even though we might not necessarily think of them in that way. When these happen in our academic life, though, we often dread them, and we'll talk about test anxiety, which can be a kind of severe form of the sort of nervousness and worry and concern that might accompany taking tests. But they are actually similar to real life tests in that they help us measure our progress towards a mastery of a particular skill. They're not a representation of how smart, talented, or skilled we are, but rather a measurement only of what we know about a specific subject at a specific point in time. And that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind. And then they're also extraordinary learning opportunities, right? So what you get right reinforces your knowledge on the particular topic, which is great. What you get wrong allows you to understand what you still need to master, right? So it can be incredibly helpful in terms of thinking about your overall mastery of a particular class's material. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit, just kind of a chart to show this sort of learning cycle as it applies to tests. Test anxiety, we're going to talk about here. Psychological condition in which a person feels distressed before, during, or after a test or exam to the point where stress causes poor performance, right? So everybody gets a little nervous going into a test, even though they might be feeling prepared, they might be feeling confident in how they're going to do. Test anxiety can actually interfere with your ability to recall knowledge from memory, as well as your ability to use higher level thinking skills effectively. So this can actually make you do worse on a test, right? So, and even in this kind of moderate test anxiety realm here, there's a lot of significant sorts of impacts that it can have, both physically and emotionally, right? And then extreme test anxiety, some real severe things. So certainly something to be concerned about. There are ways to control it, though. There's a bunch of points here, and I mean, a lot of this is just kind of the same pragmatic advice that we're going to give you throughout the semester, in terms of you got to eat right, you got to get enough sleep, exercising can be really good to manage stress. But definitely preparation, definitely practice, anything that you can do to set yourself up to help yourself with a test. The more prepared you feel, the more confident you are in your ability to do that, the less likely you'll be to experience test anxiety, right? So, and then just, again, the perspective, right? So you kind of know what the test is worth in terms of your overall grade. And, even if you do poorly on a test, it may not be as severe as you might make it out to be. Right. So again, that perspective can help. And again, yeah, this idea that, and this applies to a lot more than just test anxiety, but this idea that if you are maintaining better health, you'll have better focus, and then you'll have better grades as a result. Okay. And then effective studying is your most important tool to truly mastering the material and to being able to apply it. And again, this kind of effective learning by learning. Some of these we've encountered already. Some of these are going to be in chapters that we're going to get to over the next few weeks. But the important thing here is this idea that effective studying is an ongoing process of reviewing, right? So you can try to cram the night before. It won't be as effective because learning is really about, as we're going to talk about later in the semester, this kind of idea of converting things that are in your short-term memory to things that are in your long-term memory. And a lot of times it's repetition, a lot of times it's doing and actually utilizing the material, and over time those things become again, part of your day-to-day, and they become more reliable as they make that transition. So studying every day is a really good idea, right? So some tips here in terms of some things that you can do. From just merging class notes and textbook notes to visualizing yourself using the material, to actually doing some practice activities. There's a bunch of things here. Flashcards can be really good if you're having to deal with vocabulary, things of that nature. Review sessions, if those are offered, can be helpful. Certainly you can do study groups, which we're going to talk about here. If you're doing that, though, you want to rotate the role of whoever is leading the discussion. You want to look for complementary skills and learning styles. That'll be most helpful. Meeting regularly, thinking small, right? You don't want to have like one massive group. You want to be able to have everybody take some sort of ownership within the group. We're going to talk more later in the semester about group projects and working in groups and things of that nature. But again, just kind of the idea, if everybody's got a particular job that they're doing, nobody's really able to coast, right? So, which, again, coasting kind of defeats the purpose of being in a group, right? So types of tests. So pre-assessment, these can be kind of practice tests, measuring skills that you have when you begin, right? So getting baseline data, I should say. Formative, right? So make sure you know the material before moving on, and then summative or midterms and finals, right? So the tests that we have here are kind of more formative tests, right? So we don't have a midterm, we don't have a final, but again, we have these three tests that are ways to check in and have you demonstrate your knowledge of the material. And again, that material is going to have application to the major assignments that you're doing as well, right? So the tests are there for its own sake, to make sure that you're doing the reading, to make sure that you're grasping the key concepts that this class focuses on. And again, that whole project of becoming a better student, of being equipped, knowing how to function as a college student, these tests all relate to aspects of that, but then they're also related to other sorts of things that we're going to do, right? Like the learning profile paper will deal a lot with the chapters on learning and memory and how that happens. Obviously, the time management project deals with a lot of the concepts of time management, but also gets into the goals and values, that sort of thing, right? So test formats. So obviously in this class here, they are open book, they are electronic or online. If this was a live setting, these would not be open book tests, right? So I can't really control that, though, obviously, in this world. So, when you guys are home and all that sort of thing, right? So you are able to use your book, but again, typically if it's an open book test, it will be maybe a little bit more challenging. I mean, I try in these tests to not do anything that is too obscure, but at the same time, want to make sure that you're not having to look up the material as you were taking the test. You should have enough of the information on board to be able to take the test. So a couple of types of questions here. So multiple choice. I mean, again, you're going to be familiar with a lot of these, so I'm just going to do a real quick review. So essentially, you're presented with, say, 3 or 4 possible answers. You select one. In some cases, there will be a choice that says both A and B are correct, or both A and C are correct, or all these are correct. So sometimes there will be kind of little tricks with that, but most of the time, you're generating one answer out of a list of possibilities. True and false. That's real obvious, right? On true and false ones, though, obviously you want to make sure that you read the questions carefully. You want to do that with everything, of course, across the board, but particularly with true or false, because there might be a negative word in there that will maybe kind of throw you off a little bit if you're expecting one thing. So just be careful there. Matching. So a set of specific terms or ideas and a set of definitions or identifying characteristics, right? So you have to match one to the other, right? You'll have a group of 4 over here, you'll have a group of 4 over here, and you'll match them up accordingly, right? So filling in the blank or short answer, essentially you are plugging into something in a sentence, right? So yeah, actually short answer is a little bit different. So fill in the blank, there's a space in the sentence, there's a word that or a phrase that we're looking for you to plug in. And oftentimes those will be, around definitions and understanding concepts. Short answer will be typically you've got to create like a sentence or two around a particular question. And then essays, you're presented with questions or concepts that you must explain in depth. The ones that I have for y'all are not typically long. They're like 100 to 150 words. So they're not huge essays, but in some classes, you might have considerably longer essays that you're asked to do. But again, you should know enough about the concept to be able to produce, in the case that I give you, that 100 to 150 words, that means like, 5, 6, 7 substantial sentences that help you explain a concept. Like, for example, thinking to the early chapters, it might be, say, the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, right? So, and being able to talk about what those are, and then also how you could apply a growth mindset to your own life. It might look something like that. So you would need to produce the definitions, but you would need to do that in a way that shows a comprehension of concepts. You wouldn't just say a fixed mindset is this, a growth mindset is this, and then leave it. There's more to it than that, typically in an essay question. So, and the idea here is that there's kind of different levels of learning that you have. I mean, if it's something along the lines of fill in the blank or multiple choice, oftentimes that's going to be kind of the lower level of Bloom's taxonomy, which we're going to learn about as well a little bit later in the semester. So basically just kind of recall, making sure that you know terms, and then essays get more into kind of analyzing or even kind of creating, right? They can get at kind of the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. So typically there's going to be a mix and a test just to make sure that you can do all of those things that you know the material, right? So again, study skills as you go, study over several sessions. Again, daily is preferable, but don't try to do it all the night before. That's not a good idea. If you can generate a practice test, that's good. Getting a good night's sleep, having a healthy breakfast, making sure you have necessary materials, arrive early, relax, all those good things. During the test, you want to scan it first to see what it covers, right? So I have it possible in what we've got here online, where you can view all the questions as they're there, so you can see what's there. Writing down what you know is helpful. Planning your time accordingly. So again, they're 90-minute tests. So if you know that the 2 essay questions at the end are going to take you a considerable amount of time, you probably want to knock out the questions that you do know first. Again, answer the easy questions first, skip the harder ones, but also you want to make sure that you don't run out of time on the essays as well either, right? You want to make sure that you're leaving yourself time to do everything, right? And since it's open book, I mean, obviously, if you answer what you know and you have to look things up and you have to read, you certainly have the ability to do that with this test. But again, if it's a closed book situation, you can't do that. And so you're just going to have to guess, or you're going to have to, again, if it's multiple choice and you can eliminate 2 answers out of the 4, that's going to help you, right? So, because then you're just making essentially kind of a 50-50 choice. You're improving your odds. But it can be tricky, right? So you do want to make sure that you are reading instructions carefully, reading each question carefully, because again, people can get tripped up in that way, right? So, and again, yeah, if something is confusing, you may want to bring it up with the instructor after. Instructors will make mistakes or not mistakes, but they might make not the best choices necessarily in phrasing questions. And there might be something that you didn't realize. Like I did this with my lit class. I asked them where Equiano was from, who was a slave who wrote about his experience. And he was from Benin, which is all over the introduction, right? References to Benin. But I also put Nigeria as a possible answer, and Benin is now part of Nigeria. So that was a place where, again, students brought that to my attention. And it's like, oh yeah, that was a confusing additional answer in a multiple choice. So those things will happen sometimes. So just, but obviously, be respectful in couching that. And if the instructor, has done something that's a little misleading, then the instructor might correct those sorts of things. And then after, again, rewarding yourself for a job well done. Again, sticking with your study schedule, you want to make sure that you are continuing good study habits, and then using the test as a learning tool, right? So that's really important. And then thinking also about patterns with your test taking, and then applying feedback to the next test, right? So if you know that you are struggling with certain types of questions, you want to practice those. If there are certain concepts that you're obviously not clear on, you want to make sure to double back and get those firmed up, because again, sometimes tests will build on each other, sometimes the courses will build on each other, and you will have to have that knowledge in order to succeed on the next test. Strategies for multiple choice. Wow, we get a lot here. This is a really, really dense chapter. So I'm just going to touch on these briefly. Yeah, again, read each question carefully and trying to answer it in your head before reading the answer options, because that might clue you into what's actually correct. Clue words that hint certain option anchors might be correct or incorrect, right? So absolute words like never, always, ever, or none are rarely found in a correct option. Less absolute words like usually, often, or rarely are regularly found in correct options. I think that's kind of an interesting point. The word not, right? Skipping difficult questions, obviously, right? So there might be clues in later questions. You might recall info that you've forgotten earlier. But again, yeah, if you can eliminate ones that are clearly incorrect, that'll help you, right? So, and then you can treat those remaining answers as, that should say true, false statements, not true file. Okay, true, false. Yeah, so kind of similar to multiple choice, but again, never, always, every, none, not. Those kind of absolute words might be clues to you as well, right? So if the question is stated in the positive, you can restate it in the negative by adding not or never. Does it sound truer or more false? Again, which is kind of an interesting way to phrase that. And this is an interesting point. Most tests include more true statements than false ones, but don't guess if a wrong answer penalizes you more than one left blank. That will not be the case here. So yeah, so if you want to guess, true might be more likely. I usually try to strike a balance between, I also usually just include a few true and false. I don't typically like to use those as much as others. So matching, obviously, probably an equal number of items in both columns, but it could be possible that you might leave some items unmatched if there are more on one side than the other, right? So thinking about those. And then just some other tips here. Grouping them by parts of speech can be helpful. Start by making matches that are obvious to you, then work on the ones that require more thought, right? So short answer, again, specific information there. So read the question and ask yourself what exactly the instructor wants to know, and then keep your answer short and specific as well. You can actually lose points. You can have an answer counted wrong if you are trying to equivocate and trying to answer with several possible answers. You want to keep it defined and specific to the one that you were looking for. Okay, and then good essay answers are based on thoughts, supported by examples, your thoughts specifically, right? So look for keywords, especially the verbs, right? So if it's describe, if it's analyze, if it's evaluate, those give you clues for what kinds of information you should be inserting into your particular essay, right? So it's helpful to have some sort of outline if you can, even if it's 100 to 150 words, just having a sense of what types of sentences, what points need to be included. Being able to do that before you actually set out to compose it will be helpful, because at least you'll have kind of a roadmap for where you're going, right? So you do want to have time to proofread your essay. Sometimes in the flurry of writing, you'll miss words, you'll have syntactical errors, you'll have a homophone in there, a word that sounds like another word, but is actually spelled something and means something completely different. You just want to guard against those sorts of things, right? Because again, if you're writing in a test situation under pressure with those deadlines, it is easier to make mistakes than obviously if you have the luxury, the time of writing a paper where you can do it over multiple sessions. You can be at a little bit more relaxed pace. You're not with kind of the clock on you, right? So yeah. And then again, like I said, the essay words here, right? So, and again, a lot of these will correspond, as you're going to see when we do Bloom's taxonomy, these words compared to various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So you'll see where those kind of map into, again, just kind of thinking about levels of learning and how learning happens, right? So this is an opportunity for y'all to exhibit your knowledge in a sort of personal way. Whereas, obviously the other types of questions, you're having to show recall and you're having to show understanding of information that's pretty uniform, right? Okay. And then just evaluating tests, right? So, and these are some points that can kind of help you there in terms of, was it something along the way? Was it studying where you were not prepared for the test as you should have been? Were there focus issues when you were taking the test? Content mechanical errors, right? So again, those can be just kind of rushing through something as well, right? So, and then these are just kind of some guidelines about academic integrity, and again, plagiarism, cheating on tests, those sorts of things, right? So this obviously, since we're talking about tests, is pertaining to cheating, right? So, again, you were not supposed to be doing these tests collaboratively. You were supposed to be doing these on your own. So, if you have similar wrong answers, like saying short answers and things like that, that can create some sort of suspicion, right? So, certainly, if you cheat, you really do risk getting caught, even in situations like this where you're all taking the tests at home, where I'm not actually, watching you in the class. Like when I've done this before, I've had students that would, Google things, right? So, and I'm watching them Google things. Again, it's an open book test, so you can use those resources. You're not under the same restrictions that you would be if you were in a classroom setting with me. But again, yeah, you want to make sure that you're still practicing academic integrity. And these are, again, just kind of the rainbow, the list of ideas. So, okay. So, bunch of key takeaways from here, right? So, but again, yeah, just to reiterate this kind of idea of a time budget, I think is interesting, right? So again, this kind of idea of you have 90 minutes on the exam, that maybe the essays are each going to take you a half hour to do. So that leaves you a half hour for everything else, right? And let's say there's like 12 questions. So obviously, that's going to be a few minutes on each question. So if you can get 8 of them answered right away, and then you have to look up the answers for 2, or you have to, just kind of sit back for a moment and think and remember, okay, what was this thing in chapter 3? What did Professor West say? What did I write? What did I read rather? And those sorts of questions that you can ask yourself will be really helpful. Okay. Yeah, so that is it for chapter 13. Wish you luck on the test, and we will talk more down the road here.